drastic and remarkable was in prospect. Mike, though, was able to write a letter to the girl who'd written him. Major Holt arranged it. Mike wrote his letter on paper supplied by security, with ink supplied by security, and while watched by security officers. His letter was censored by Major Holt himself, and it did not reveal that Mike was back on Earth. But it did invite a reply, and Mike sweated as if he waited for one. The others had plenty to sweat about. Joe and Haney and the Chief were acting as instructors to the moonship's crew. They taught practical space navigation. At first, they thought they hadn't much to pass on, but they found out otherwise. They had to pass on data on everything from how to walk to how to drink coffee, how to eat, sleep, why one should wear a gravity harness, and the manners and customs of ships in space. They had to show why in space fighting a ship might send missiles on before it, but would really expect to do damage with those it left behind. They had to warn of the dangers of unshielded sunshine and the equal danger of standing in shadow for more than 5 minutes, and they had material for 6 months of instruction courses, but there was barely a week to pass it on. Joe was run ragged, but in spite of everything, he managed to talk at some length with Sally. He found himself curiously anxious to discuss any number of things with his father, too, who suddenly appeared to be much more intelligent than Joe had ever noticed before. He was almost unhappy when it was certain that the moonship would take off for space on the following day. He talked about it with Sally the night before the takeoff. "Look," he said awkwardly, "as far as I'm concerned, this has turned out a pretty sickly business. But when we have got a base on the moon, it'll be a good job done. There will be one thing that nobody can stop. Everybody's been living in terror of war. If we hold the moon, the Cold War will be ended. You can't kick on my wanting to help end that." Sally smiled at him in the moonlight. "And, meanwhile," said Joe clumsily, "well, when I come back we can do some serious talking about, well, careers and such things. Until then, no use, right?" Sally's smile wavered. "Very sensible," she agreed wryly. "And awfully silly, Joe. I know what kind of a career I want. What other fascinating topic do you know to talk about, Joe?" "I don't know of any. Oh, yes, Mike got a letter from this girl. I don't know what she said, but he's walking on air." "But it isn't funny," said Sally indignantly. "Mike's a person, a fine person. If he'll let me, I'll write to his girl myself, try to make friends with her, so when you come back, maybe I can sort of matchmake her." "That I like," Joe said warmly. "You're swell sometimes, Sally." Sally looked at him enigmatically in the moonlight. "There are times when it seems to escape your attention," she observed. The next morning she cried a little when he left her, to climb in the space tug which was so small a part of today's activity. Joe and his crew were the only living men who had ever made a round trip to the platform and back. But now there was the moonship to go farther than they'd been allowed. It was even clumsier in design than the platform, though it was smaller. But it wasn't designed to stay in space. It was to rest on the powdery floor of a ring-mounted central plane. Let it get off into space, and somehow get to the platform to reload. Then let it replace the rockets it would burn in this takeoff, and it could go on out to emptiness. It would make history as the first serious attempt by human beings to reach the moon. Joe and his followers would go along simply to handle the guided missiles if it came to a fight, and to tow the moonship to its wharf, the platform, and out into midstream again when it resumed its journey, and that was all. The moonship lifted from the floor of the shed to the sound of hundreds of push-pot engines. Then the space tug roared skyward, her takeoff rockets here substituted for the push-pots. Her second-stage rockets were also of the non-poisonous variety, because she fired them at a bare 60,000 feet, They were substitutes for the JATOs the pushpots carried. She was out in space when the third stage rockets roared dully outside her hull. When the moonship crossed the west coast of Africa, the space tug was 400 miles below and 500 miles behind. When the moonship crossed Arabia, the difference was 200 miles vertically and less than 100 in line. Then the moonship released small objects, steadied by gyroscopes and flung away by puffs of compressed air. The small objects spread out. Haney and Mike and the chief had reloaded the firing racks from inside the ship, and now were intent upon control boards and radar. They pressed buttons. One by one, little puffs of smoke appeared in space. They had armed the little space missiles, setting off tiny flares which had no function except to prove that each missile was ready for use. By the time the two spacecraft floated toward India, above an area from which war rockets had been known to rise, there were more little weapons floating with them. One screen of missiles hurtled on before the space tug, and another behind. Anything that came up from Earth would instantly be attacked by dozens of midget ships bent upon suicide. Radar probed the space formation, but enemies of the fleet and the platform very wisely did no more than probe. The moonship and its attendants went across the Pacific, still rising. Above the longitude of Washington, the space tug left its former post and climbed, nudging the moonship this way and that. And from behind, the platform came floating splendidly. Tiny figures in spacesuits extended the incredibly straight lines, which were plastic hoses filled with air. Very, very gently indeed, the great, bulbous platform and the squat, flat moonship came together and touched. They moored in contact. And then the inert small missiles that had floated below, all the way up, flared simultaneously. Their rockets emitted smoke. In fine alignment, they plunged forward through emptiness, swerved with a remarkable precision, and headed out for emptiness beyond the platform's orbit. Their function had been to protect the moonship on its way out. That function was performed. There were too many of them to recover, so they went out toward the stars. When their rockets burned out, they vanished. But a good hour later, when it was considered that they were as far out as they were likely to go, they began to blow up. Specks of flame, like the tiniest of new stars, flickered against the background of space. But Joe and the others were in the platform by then. They brought up mail for the crew, and they were back on duty. The platform seemed strange with the moonship's crew aboard. It had been a gigantic artificial world with very few inhabitants. With 25 naval ratings about, plus the 4 of its regular crew, plus the space tug's complement, it seemed excessively crowded. And it was busy. There were 25 new men to be guided as they applied what they'd been taught aground about life in space. It was 3 full Earth days before the stores, intended for the journey to the moon and the maintenance of a base there, really began to move. The tug and the space wagons had to be moored outside, and reached only by spacesuits through small personal airlocks. And there was the matter of discipline. Lieutenant Commander Brown had been put in command of the platform for experience in space. He was considered to be prepared for command of the moonship by that experience. So now he turned over the command of the platform to Brent. He made a neat ceremony of it, and took over the ship that would go out to the moon. He made another ceremony out of that. In command of the moonship, his manner to Joe was absolutely correct. He followed regulations to the letter, to a degree that left Joe blankly uncomprehending. But he wouldn't have gotten along in the Navy if he hadn't. He tried to do the same thing in the platform, and it wasn't practical. But he ignored all differences between Joe and himself. He made no overtures of friendship, but that was natural. Unintentionally, Joe had defied him. He now deliberately overlooked all that, and Joe approved of him, within limits. But Mike and Haney and the chief did not. They laid for him, and they considered that they got him. When he took over the moonship,